Lucille Lange is the author of 7 full-length poetry collections and 4 chapbooks. Her most recent collection is Birds of San Pancho and Other Poems of Place, published by Blue Light Press, November 2020, so brand new. She has co-edited 2 anthologies. One is For Fire and Rain, Eco-Poetry of California, and the other one is called Red Indian Road West, Native American Poetry from California. And she's also published 2 children's books and a memoir, Married at 14, A True Story. Lucille's many honors include the Blue Light Poetry Prize, 2 Penn, Oakland Josephine Miles Literary Awards, the Joseph Henry Jackson Award, and 10 Pushcart Prize nominations. She is the founder and publisher of Scarlett Tanager Books. Visit her at lucillelange.com. And our second reader tonight is Ruth Nolan. Ruth writes about the California desert's culture and wildfire. Her work has appeared in Boom, California, University of California, News from Native California, KCET, Tending Nature and Artbound, LA, Los Angeles Fiction Anthology, published by Red Hen Press, Desert Oracle, and Desert Sun and Desert Magazine, USA Today. Ruth is the co-editor of Fire and Rain, Eco-Poetry of California, and editor of No Place for a Puritan, Literature of California's Deserts, published by Heyday Books. She's the curator of the writing and visual documentary project, Fire on the Mojave, Stories from the Deserts and Mountains of Inland Southern California. Ruth is a professor of creative writing at College of the Desert and a former wildland firefighter for the U.S. Forest Service and BLM California Desert District. Please welcome Lucille Lange and Ruth Nolan.
Thank you. Ruth and I are going to start out reading from this anthology that we co-edited, Fire and Rain, Eco-Poetry of California. This anthology was published by my press, Scarlett Tanager Books, in 2018. And Ruth and I are giving all of the profits from Fire and Rain to 7 environmental organizations. And I was trained as a biologist before I became a poet, so matters of biology have always been central to my poetry. And in this book, Fire and Rain, it's an anthology of poems about California ecosystems. So there are sections corresponding to bioregions. There are 8 sections, for example, coast and ocean is a section, coastal redwoods, desert, etc. And Ruth and I called the book Fire and Rain because fire and rain are so important in shaping all California ecosystems. As it turns out, fire has a good and important role to play in California ecosystems. There were fires here long before there were people. A lot of species have evolved to thrive in fire. The cones of some conifers don't open and release their seeds until there's a fire. But now things have changed and gotten totally out of hand due to human activities. And humans have caused climate change, which makes everything hotter and drier and more flammable. More people are moving into wild areas that are prone to wildfires. And so that results in more loss of buildings and lives. And then on top of all of that, we have a really reckless power company, PG&E, which has always consistently put profits ahead of people and safety. But Fire and Rain is not just a book about things that go wrong. It's not just about climate change and pollution and loss of species and habitat. I think above all, it's a book that celebrates the beauty and the diversity of California ecosystems. So I'm going to read 3 poems from Fire and Rain, And when I read from Fire and Rain, I always like to start with a fire poem and a rain poem. We don't have a fire or rain section of the book because, as I said, fire and rain applies to all California ecosystems. So these types of poems are found throughout the collection. And the first poem I'll read is called Redwood Grove After Fire. It's by Mendocino poet Maureen Epstein. Crunch of black fragments underfoot, faint whiff of char, earth beside the trail fresh broken, where a burned tree fell, as they sometimes do, years later. Cave walls of the hollow giants gleam with fresh scorch. Ferns have returned to the flat, though sparser now. More logs among them fallen. We celebrate survival. Redwood sorrel has spread its green salve over ashy ground. Warty and wrinkled, the old ones stand in their accustomed silence. And next, I'll read a rain poem. This is a sonnet called Gualala Winter, and it's by Kathleen McCullaugh. Keep dreaming of gray deer asleep in woods, as sheets of rain claim every living thing, tailor bees, bracelet cones, chipmunks, hawk broods, high up in nests that sway but last, each wing, leaf, stem of fern, soaked through, wet to the core. Endures these January storms we track, evade behind our screens, our twice locked doors. Nervous, we curse old roofs, new leaks, come back, mend quietly what's torn, listen to wind, confuse it with Pacific surf close by. Cars crossing flooded roads, gray deer may find, logs hollowed out may curl inside. Stay mostly dry under moss bark, or not, our sun will rise, night storms will end, we animals open our eyes. And I will conclude my reading from Fire and Rain with a poem of my own called Eye of the Beholder, and this is from the Hills and Canyons section of the book. And it starts with an epigraph. The symmetrical arrangement of variously shaped setae and the ornate sculpturing of their cuticle make many mites some of the most beautiful and spectacular of all animals. And that's Robert D. Barnes, Invertebrate Zoology. Scarlet pimpernels nod by a trail on Mount Diablo, flat stars glowing close to earth. Under a rotting log, slime mold also blooms red, a royal garden for the termite queen, who'll charm her half-pint king for years, each day laying thousands of eggs to be nurtured by workers and guarded by soldiers whose soft, slender bodies shine like pearls. Farther up, amid wild hyacinths, tiny blue faces with fluted necks floating on the frozen waves of the Franciscan Formation, a black widow spider spins her web. Her legs are long and shapely, her body a marble, polished black, with a perfect orange-red hourglass on the belly. Complete in herself, she'll eat her mate, savoring his juices. Under yellow wallflowers rising in tall grass, a wolf spider, hairy as a cat's ear, emerges from her nest to scout the earth, with 4 pairs of eyes that glisten when sunlight strikes them. She drags a ball-shaped gray silk sack packed with eggs. Soon spiderlings will cover her back and she'll chase her prey, then pounce to feed the magnificent dress, her quivering little ones. Climbing past poison oak and muir pines, I emanate butyric acid. And to the small creatures of the forest and meadow, I must smell like a pot roast shimmering in fine wine. A hungry baby finds me, a nymph of the western black-legged tick, which digs its toothed pincers deep into my thigh and expands, a balloon filling with crimson liquid. And all the bacteria dance as they multiply in my blood. I am one with them, one with the tick, my epidermis a fragrant field flowering over hidden rivers, piquant, delicious. So thank you. And now my co-editor, Ruth, will read from Fire and Rain.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. Lucy, that was beautiful. I'm going to throw in a poem of mine that is actually from my No Place for a Puritan book, which you can get from Heyday if you're interested in reading about the California desert. That's kind of my thing. Speaking on this election eve against, in a metaphoric way, against toxic masculinity, which has been out of control in our country. We all might, many of us might know what I'm saying. And this is called Mirage. My 10-year-old daughter is feeling brave. We go rock hunting today, exploring far beyond the last dirt road. Just she and I, no husband or dad. We see the sand dunes, Kelso Dunes, East Mojave, from miles away. Some hallucinogenic scene in the Sahara, camel humps rising from the flat desert floor. My daughter wants to climb them, but there's no way to guess how far away they are, no sure measure to tell how tall. I tell her it's not safe to hike mountains, so unstable, hills that shift in the wind. Our boots would fill with sand, and we'd sink like thirsty prospectors, come to find buried treasure, lured by promises of silver, the hollow chant of a rattlesnake's charms. So thank you. Very honored and excited to have been invited by Lucy to be her co-editor for Fire and Rain. And I think Lucy would agree with me in saying that since we began working on the book, you know, some years ago, the whole idea of what this book means in terms of the echo poetry of California has really taken on a lot of urgency and resonance. And I would say that the echo poems in this book celebrate and love all of the amazing ecosystems of California, but also kind of convey a sense of how quickly they are vanishing. We must fight for them. And sadly, this is becoming more and more true even here in the California desert. And so the poems I have included in the anthology and a lot of the work I'm doing now addresses this. A lot of people don't know about the corruption of the renewable energy industry, which is pitched as being a really good thing, go green. But on the other hand, it's just as corrupt as PG&E because the way that it's going down in the deserts is really reckless. Clear blading forests of pristine Joshua tree habitat and running over Native American sacred sites and disregarding input from people like me saying, there's a better way to do this. And there are places in the desert that are already impacted by people, and these would be better places to site the solar. So I feel very passionate to speak to that in my own writing. I'm gonna read a few poems of mine from the book, and I'm sorry if I misunderstood Lucy. So I'm just gonna read. The first one is called Ghost Flower, Mohavia contriflora. And this is for Mary Beale, who was a botanist in the mid-20th century, a woman who went out into the desert on her own. Can you imagine, in the mid-20th century? And she discovered and named and recorded a lot of botanic species in the Mojave Desert, which to this day still remains the one part of California that a lot of species have not been named or found. So if you look at a botanic chart in California, a botanist friend of mine told me, all of the other parts of California have tons of little dots, and the Mojave Desert is still almost entirely open. So there's a lot left to be discovered here. And Mary Beale definitely was a heroine for all times. Shivering by day and glowing at night, blooming only in March and April, this flower marked by splotches of red in its white heart, attracting lovers through mimicry, not producing nectar, named by a botanist who worked alone in the deep Mojave to render it bold. This small flower speaks with a lisp on the rocky lips of forsaken canyons, flourishing where no woman should go, forever hard to find unless you tiptoe by. And my other poem from Fire and Rain will be a poem I've written about my experiences fighting fires back in the day. And one of the things that really has struck me, especially as I've gotten older, you know, when I was doing the work, I didn't think about it, but how many of the terms of firefighting are domestic terms? And I'm like, that's kind of weird, because this has always been associated with being manly work. And so I got out there and it seemed like I was doing domestic chores. And this poem speaks to that a little bit. Mopping up. It's the most unraveled and well-paying job I've had, fighting fires in far-flung, fiery wilderness areas, all the way from the San Bernardino National Forest to the Panamint Mountains in Death Valley, the Southern Sierra in Yosemite, the San Gabriels looming above LA, the Marble Mountains and Trinity Wilderness. Most of the time, I was the only female on the crew, cutting fireline and sucking down smoke. And after a fire had laid down across ravaged meadows and once forested slopes, our job was far from done. We'd hike in baked potato hot, ankle-deep ash that blew eerily in the wind, shed snakeskins, and finished off dying wildfires by stirring and cooling the molten detritus with our sharpened shovels. To finish the job, we would spray dribbles of water from the fat bags that sloshed like heavy vertigo on our backs, also known as piss pumps. We struggled to keep pace in the slowed down underbelly of burned up things in cherished, if little known, Golden State geographies with lonely names: Rattlesnake Mountain, Horse Thief Spring, Last Chance Range, Toro Peak. And above us, the whispered remains of once familiar forest trees, lurking black, tall, and jagged, stripped of the dignity of their given names: Jeffrey Pine, Ponderosa, Western Sequoia, California Black Oak. And at our feet, the complete bequeathing of the latter fuels: Manzanita, Western Juniper, Coyote Brush, Poison Oak. We could never be sure the fire was completely out, so we stirred the ash, sifting through what had been scorched. We watched each unearthed ember spark hot and red, then whoosh into its puffy last breath. And this is what I remember the most from my firefighting days: the mopping up, making sure the fire was put to bed, soothing the feverish brow of forsaken landscapes to cool them down. That, and how often the guys on the crew would ask me why I'd left behind the apron of my domesticity to flirt with flames instead of them.